The courtroom was packed that day. Sitting in the defendant's chair was Dr. Jerome Harron, 42 years old, a tall black man, his head bowed, sorrow in his eyes, wearing a wrinkled white doctor's coat. Today he stood accused of murder. A shout rang out from the back of the courtroom. "You have to pay. You killed my father." All eyes turned. A white man in a judge's robe had shot to his feet, face flushed with rage. It was Judge Nolan Whitmore, 44, the well-known son of the late Governor Charles Whitmore, who had died just 3 days earlier while being treated at home by Dr. Harland. Chuckles rippled through the room from the police officer stationed along the walls. Their eyes were cold, full of scorn. One of them muttered sarcastically, "A black doctor treating the governor and ends up killing him. Forgot his place, huh?" Wait a second. Tell us what do you think of the story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The courtroom buzzed with noise. Judge Margaret Elwood, a white woman in her 60s, had to call for order before speaking again. "Dr. Harron, do you plead guilty to the charge of intentional homicide while practicing medicine?" Her voice rang out from the high bench. Jerome lifted his head, eyes steady. "No, Your Honor, I didn't kill anyone." Chaos erupted in the courtroom again, but Jerome's face remained calm and unreadable, like a man who knew an even bigger storm was coming. 3 weeks earlier, at the estate of Governor Charles Whitmore in the northern suburbs of the city, where 3M-high iron gates couldn't hide the pride of the elite, Dr. Jerome Harland was summoned on that fateful afternoon by none other than Judge Nolan. "My father feels dizzy. His heart's racing and he hasn't eaten since morning. Please come right away." Jerome didn't ask questions. He grabbed his medical bag and drove nearly an hour to see the man he had been caring for over the past 10 years. On the second floor, inside the governor's study, Charles Whitmore, a large man in his 70s with an air of authority, sat slumped in a chair, forehead glistening with sweat, breathing fast. Jerome quickly examined him and diagnosed a sudden spike in blood pressure. He administered an injection of hydralazine, a vasodilator he had used on Charles many times before. The next day and the day after that, Jerome returned to monitor his condition, adjusting the dosage as needed. Charles stabilized, but on the morning of the 5th day, Jerome arrived and gave him the usual injection, then left as usual. 30 minutes later, Charles called him in distress. "My chest, it hurts, I can't." Jerome panicked and called for an ambulance. But while the vehicle was still stuck at an intersection, and before Jerome could make it back to see Charles one last time, the governor had stopped breathing. The funeral was held swiftly, but the news spread like wildfire. 3 days later, the devoted family doctor was taken into custody under investigation for medical negligence resulting in death. Why? Because in the medical waste bin at the governor's home, police found an empty vial of propanol, a beta blocker inappropriate for treating acute hypertension like Charles's. That wasn't all. The real bombshell came when the governor's will was revealed. 80% of his estate, including shares in banks, real estate holdings, and investment funds totaling $240 million, was left to Dr. Jerome Harlan. The remaining 20% went to charities. Not a single cent for Nolan. The public went into an uproar. Headlines blared. "Black doctor manipulates governor into handing over fortune. Governor dies days after will. Changes. Coincidence or murder?" Every finger pointed at Jerome, but he did not crumble. In the cold cell, he stayed silent, resolute. He believed one thing. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, would always find its way back. Back in the packed courtroom, all eyes were locked on Dr. Jerome Harron. He stood silently in the defendant's box, isolated amid the murmurs and judgments that pierced like needles straight through his chest. Judge Margaret Elwood tapped her gavel lightly. "Order," she commanded, trying to keep the trial from spiraling into chaos again after Judge Nolan Whitmore, son of the late Governor Charles Whitmore, had shouted accusations that Dr. Harlan murdered his father. After declaring his innocence, Jerome had gone silent. He kept his head bowed, hands tightly clasped together. Whether in prayer or despair, no one could tell. Then suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A young black girl, about 17 or 18, small-framed and visibly anxious, rushed in, drawing gasps from the crowd. "Order! Unauthorized individuals are not allowed in the courtroom," a police officer shouted, moving toward her, but the girl broke free and shouted, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I have evidence. Dr. Harlan is innocent." All eyes turned to her. Judge Nolan's face went pale as he sprang to his feet. "You filthy little black girl, what's a lowly maid doing here? Get her out now." The girl gritted her teeth. "My name is Zora. I've been working at the governor's estate for the past 3 years, and I know the truth you've been trying to hide, Mr. Whitmore." Judge Elwood squinted at Zora and raised a hand to stop the officer. "Speak clearly, young lady. What evidence?" Zora's hands trembled as she held up a small battered video camera, its paint chipped from use. "This contains footage from the governor's final night, his death. It wasn't because of Dr. Harlan." She drew a deep breath, her voice shaking with emotion. "That night after Dr. Harlan gave the injection and left, I was cleaning the room when I heard yelling. Mr. Nolan was screaming, saying the governor had no right to abandon his own flesh and blood and give everything to that black bastard." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, not for Dr. Harlan this time, but for the words flesh and blood and black bastard. Zora pressed on. "I didn't dare interfere, but I saw Mr. Nolan storm off in anger. The governor lay down trembling and soon fell asleep. It all happened so fast. Less than 30 minutes later, he was dead. Then they blamed Dr. Harlan, but he's a good man. He even gave me vitamins without charging me a dime. I didn't believe he could have done this. Something felt wrong. So, I went back to search the governor's room." She bowed her head, overcome with emotion. "While I was looking, I accidentally knocked over a flower bush. That's when this little camera fell out. I turned it on and found the governor's final moments." She handed the device to the court. Moments later, the courtroom. Screen flickered to life. Silence fell like a curtain. On the screen, Governor Charles Whitmore sat upright, aged but resolute, engaged in a tense confrontation with Nolan. "You're not my son, Nolan. You're the child of an affair your mother forced me to claim. I tried to raise you with kindness, because children aren't to blame. But all you've ever cared about is money and status. I don't trust you anymore. You're on your own now. So you trust him? That dirty, low-born black doctor? He's worth more than me. He saved my life more times than I can count. He never asked for anything. He's cared for me more than any doctor or son ever has. I left him my fortune because I believe he'll use it to do what's right." The next clip showed Nolan leaving. The governor, exhausted, drifted into sleep. And then the final damning footage silenced the courtroom. Nolan re-entered holding a small brown vial, the same one later found in the medical waste bin. Quietly, he approached his sleeping father and injected the drug into his vein. No one said a word for a long moment. The whispers had vanished. The air inside the courtroom was thick, heavy with disbelief. Even Dr. Jerome Harlan couldn't quite believe what he had just seen. He exhaled deeply, his shoulders finally relaxing. Slowly, he turned to look at Zora. The young girl bit her lip, tears falling silently down her cheeks. Nolan Whitmore, suddenly, shot up from his seat shouting, "Lies, it's all lies, that girl faked the video." But no one believed him anymore. His face had gone pale, his eyes wild with panic. Judge Elwood raised her gavel high, her voice cold and resolute. "This court orders the immediate arrest of Nolan Whitmore for the crimes of premeditated murder, evidence tampering, and false accusation." Nolan, once standing tall on the pedestal of power, now thrashed like a madman, yelling, "No, she's just a servant, a black maid. You'd believe her over me? I'm a judge. I'm the governor's son." A swift punch from one of the officers dropped him to the ground. Zora stepped back, trembling, tears streaming freely. Dr. Harlan, for the first time, stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. His eyes shimmered with quiet, overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you, Zora. You saved my life." Just a week later, the court declared Dr. Jerome Harlan innocent of all charges and sentenced Nolan Whitmore to life in prison for murder. Standing before a sea of flashing cameras, Dr. Harlan appeared in a sharp gray suit, his voice calm and steady. "I never wanted the money. I only wanted the truth to be respected. Months later, every cent of the late governor's fortune left to Dr. Harland was placed into a medical trust fund for black communities, and the homeless named the Whitmore Redemption Foundation. As for Zora, the small, quiet maid who had once stood trembling in the courtroom, she was granted a full medical scholarship to Harvard, fulfilling a special request made by Dr. Harland himself. He stood at the edge of the university steps, watching her disappear into the lecture hall, his eyes soft and serene. For the first time in months of storm and silence, Jerome Harland smiled. Justice doesn't always wear a judge's robe, and truth doesn't always come from the most powerful voice. Sometimes it's the smallest among us, like a young maid whose courage and conscience shine light into the shadows of prejudice and lies. This story reminds us that character is not defined by skin color, and that anyone, no matter how low their status, can be the keeper of truth. Justice cannot be silenced as long as someone dares to stand up for